Welcome to Community Services Unlimited's Virtual Garden Gateway Workshop. I'm Heather Fenney, Co-Executive Director with Community Services Unlimited.
And I'm Sage, the Youth Program Coordinator for CSU's From the Ground Up program.
We're here at the Expo Farm, where typically every month we would gather to do our healthy home gardening and healthy cooking classes here in the garden space and in the classroom.
The topic for today is going to be garden planning and propagation.
We know a lot of folks right now are starting their gardens. Maybe you're an experienced gardener. Maybe you're just getting started for the first time. There's a lot of important reasons right now to be growing food at home. Part of it is to create our own green space, which is critical for our physical and mental health, especially while so many of us are not able to get out as much as we used to. Also for ensuring that we have access to the healthy food that we need to keep our immune system strong. And we know that reliable access to fresh food and good food has been hard for many during this time. And then also open up the opportunity for creating a micro enterprise. Maybe you want to barter or sell, trade with your neighbors the different things that you grow, or maybe even start a small business where you sell to small businesses like Community Services Unlimited's Village Marketplace. If you're watching this video on Facebook or Instagram the day of its release, we will be following this with a live Q&A session at 10:30 a.m. Pacific, and you can live stream that. Join us for the live stream on Instagram. If you're watching this on YouTube, then at the end of the workshop, we will post the video of the live Q&A, and you're welcome to post any additional questions that you might have in the comments, and we'll get back to you.
Thanks, Heather. Let's get started.
Okay, so we're going to talk about planning for your garden. No matter what kind of space you have, you can grow food, whether it be a balcony, a stairwell, a windowsill, or if you have access to a little bit of outdoor space or maybe a big yard. One of the first things you need to do is decide, where are you going to grow food? And are you going to grow it in the ground, in a raised bed, or in pots, depending on the space that you have. Once you know that, a really important thing to look at is the microclimate of the space where you're going to be growing. In particular, what does the sunlight look like? And a really good way to do that is to visit your space on one day over a series of hours to see how the sun comes in, moves across, and then moves out of your space. So here, I took a picture of my own garden as an example. Here's a picture at 10 a.m., at 3 p.m., and here it is at 6 p.m. So you can see from the photos how the sun moves over the space. Starts in partial, there's some full sun, and then there's partial sun. And this is really going to influence the kinds of plants I choose to grow. Some plants require a full day, 8 hours of sunlight. Things like your tomatoes, peppers, chilies, eggplant, a lot of your popular summer plants. Other things do well in partial shade, like beets, carrots, and then some things are okay with full shade. Your lettuces, and some herbs, more delicate herbs like cilantro or parsley. So in my space, I might be able to do an eggplant or a tomato in the far corner that gets mostly sun most of the day. But for the most part, I'm going to stick to carrots, beets, lettuce, things like that. I'm doing some green onions, things that do okay with partial or mostly having shade. Another thing that you want to consider is your access to water. Both water that you're going to be using to care for your garden, and also where water might come in that you're not planning for. So one is there a hose nearby, a spigot? Do you have a hose or a watering can that can reach your plants so that you're ready as soon as you get things planted to be sure that things are watered? But the other things you need to consider are, is there a sprinkler nearby that maybe comes on every morning at 5 a.m. and drifts onto the space where you're going to be growing food? Or are you neighboring a fence that you maybe share with a neighbor, and they have a sprinkler and that drips water, seeps down under the fence into your garden space? So again, just like you observe the sun, you can go out, and if you know sprinklers are running nearby, if you know that you have a neighbor that's watering things, Maybe your balcony is below someone else's and sometimes things drip down, and observe what's happening in terms of water getting into your space. And also, if you're growing in the ground, looking at things like the slope. If you water the area, does it have a natural slope and the water seeps down to one end, and maybe it dries out quicker at the highest point versus the lowest point? Similar if it's maybe a hilled space, is it drier at the top where you might be growing and stays wetter at the bottom? So you need to consider these things so you can plan for how often you're going to be watering your garden and how much you're going to need. If you're growing in containers like pots or even buckets, you also have to think about the kind of container you're growing in and how that's going to impact your watering. If you're growing in a plastic pot, anything you grow in, you want to be sure there's holes at the bottom so that as you water, any excess water can leach out. But if you're growing in a plastic pot, the water is not going to be evaporating out the sides. It may get hot if it's like a black pot, and that'll cause your water to evaporate, but the soil in the center may stay more moist, as opposed to if you're growing in a ceramic pot, where not only are you evaporating water from the top, but also because they're porous, you're evaporating water out the sides. And so those are going to need to be watered more often. So now you've thought about where your garden's going to be located, and you've thought about what kind of space you're going to be growing in, on the ground, a raised bed, or maybe in containers. And then you have to start thinking about what kind of plants are you going to grow. So first you want to think, do you want to grow things to eat? Do you want to grow things for beauty, like flowers? Do you want to be attracting pollinators, bees and other things? Or maybe you don't want to. Like in my case, I'm always sure not to plant flowering herbs near my back door because the kids play back there and I don't want them to get stung by bees. Depending on the space you have, that's going to influence the plants that you choose to grow. Some plants can grow very well in a small space. Even a tomato or an eggplant, which can be rather large, you can grow in a pot, you can trellis it up. But are you going to grow vining things like a squash or a watermelon? Do you have the space for it to spread across the ground that it needs? And if you're doing it in a container, is it large enough for the root system of that plant? So a very small pot might be appropriate for an herb or some other small plant, where you might need something quite a bit larger if you wanted to maybe grow a chili plant. Those don't get quite as big. And if you wanted to grow a tomato, you might want something as big as like a 5-gallon bucket at least, or to do that into the ground. So that's going to influence selecting the plants that you're going to grow. Once you've got your garden space figured out, the next and most exciting step is to pick your plants and get started with growing them. And now Sage is going to show us how to grow plants starting from seed.
Today I'm going to be talking about seeds. Seeds are a great way to start a garden because they're super economical. This pack right here costs about $1, and if you grew all of it, you'd have a lot of summer squash. So if you're worried about the price of getting started, a pack of seeds is a great way to start. CSU also has our own seed library, and you're more than welcome to come by, check out some seeds, and there'll be more information about that later. But yeah, we're going to get started looking at our summer squash. And if you take a look at the pack that it comes in, it actually has a lot of information. So even if you don't really know what you're working with, just read the pack. Back here, we figured out that how to plant it, how far apart to plant it, how many days until germination. One trick is you can get a lot of information just by looking at seeds. So these seeds are pretty big. If you see here, they're not something that's tiny that's going to fly away in the wind. They're pretty sizable, and that influences how they get planted. So even if you didn't have a pack, you would know by looking at this that it has to be a bit deeper in the ground. If we read the back of the packet, it says it wants to be about 1/2 inch to 1 inch, so about the size of a fingernail, right? So that's what I'm going to do. Just going to make a little hole right in here, get my seed, plop it in and make sure it gets covered up, give it a good watering, and then really keep an eye on it. If you're going to start from seeds, you're going to take a lot more care than starting with a start or a plant that's already going. So it's a great thing to do in quarantine since you're at home all the time. Check on them morning and night. That's what I do with my seeds at home. And if you have young kids around, it's really exciting to watch them grow. So highly recommend starting with seeds. And just a note on watering your seeds, once you have them planted, you want to make sure that they're in a nice damp soil. You don't want it muddy, you don't want to overwater, but to really get them going, get them sprouting, they like to be moist. So I recommend watering with like a mister or like a lighter volume on your nozzle, but don't just dump water on them. They'll drown, they won't like it, but make sure that the soil is moist. And you can just check that by going on the corner of wherever you've planted, digging around a little bit, seeing if it's moist down there. So this is an example of some of the light watering you'd want to do. You see it's coming out pretty loosely, moving it around. We like to tell the young people we work with that you want to make it rain on the little seeds. You don't want to dump a whole bucket on it. So this is what you should be aiming for, and what not to do is more like this. Little seeds really can't handle all of that pressure. It's either going to bury them deeper or they're going to drown in all that water. So again, you want to keep it nice and light. Try to make it rain. So aside from pots, you can also plant into a raised bed or directly into the ground. And right now we're going to be planting into a raised bed that goes pretty deep. And so carrots are actually an okay choice for this. If you are trying to grow carrots, I recommend going directly into the ground or a sizable bed like this, because their root system is the carrot, so they need a lot of space to grow. So just a note on seed size, if you notice, carrot seeds are extremely small. So when we reference back to the seed packet, it lets us know that they only want to be planted about 1/4 to 1/2 inch deep. And that's because of their size, because we know that seeds, to actually get started, need the sun, they need water, and they need good nutritious soil. So we don't want to plant these so deep that they can't get activated by the sunlight. So when we do start planting them, you're not going to create like a huge mound of dirt on top of them, because then they'll never see the light of day. You want to plant them really shallow and just lightly cover them with some soil. So I'm going to show you 2 different techniques. One of them is broadcasting, and I'm also going to show you making a nice row. So right here, as you can see, I have a nice little row. It's not that deep, and I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle the carrot seeds right in. Not all of them are going to make it, so it's okay to overdo it and thin them out later. And then I'm just going to loosely cover it up, and that's planting in a row. And then if you want to broadcast it, you just take your seeds and lightly, you're not really throwing them, you're kind of dropping them all over the bed. And when you're done with that, you're just going to take some soil and sprinkle it on top. You can even shake it up a little bit. And when you're all finished up with your planting your bed or wherever you're planting, you want to make sure you give it a nice good watering and be checking it pretty constantly to make sure the seeds are still moist and getting the water they need. If you started your seedling in a pot and now you want to transplant it to a larger space, Devin's going to show you how to do that.
All right, so now we're going to talk about transplanting. And so now that you've maybe put a few seeds into the ground and you see some of them popping up, you want to wait until you see some of the true leaves come up, and you'll end up with something kind of growing out of your pot like this, right? So we're going to go over a few different ways to transplant, and we're going to start with something kind of delicate like this lettuce right here. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure that you put the entire root system below the ground of the soil, fully covered. And so you want to dig a hole before you transplant that's about the size of your container and a little bit deeper, and maybe just a little bit wider. And so once you have that dug out, you're going to kind of massage the side of your container, if it is a plastic one that's kind of movable like that, and very gently I'm going to grab, especially with something as delicate as lettuce, I'm going to grab the base of it and kind of topple it over, right? Let some of that come out. And what I'm going to have left is kind of like this little root ball that you see right here, right? And I'm going to put this right in the soil. Right? I'm going to put some dirt kind of around it. But what I'm doing is, again, making sure that the entire root ball is covered. And this is sitting just right at the soil level. I'm going to kind of press down on that to make sure it's compact. Make sure that the roots are kind of facing downwards. And there we go. All right, so now we have our beautiful little collard green plant right here. And this is gonna be like a lot of actually plants that you're likely gonna be transplanting, and ones that are maybe a bit more, little more hardy, a little less delicate. You see I can like hold on to the stem right here. And we are gonna dig a bit deeper for this one. Just because when you have something as leggy, or maybe that's kind of been sitting in a pot for a little bit longer, and it's kind of really ready to get into the ground, you can actually plant or transplant the plant a lot deeper than you would like a lettuce or something like that. And so, as you can see, I have about, I don't know, about that much soil in the pot right here. And I dug a hole that's pretty deep, maybe about double the depth of that. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of hold the collards like this between my fingers. I'm gonna turn it right over like that, right? And let all this come out. And luckily we don't have too much, or you can kind of see right here, there's some root growth kind of built up on the edge of the side of the container. And I'm gonna just kind of gently loosen that up a little bit, right? I don't wanna let all of the soil go, but just enough to kind of get in there. And I wanna make sure as much of the roots are facing down as possible. And I'm gonna kind of suspend it in the air like this. And I'm gonna plant it as deep as I can. New growth is coming out of the plant right here, as you can see, right at the top part. And that means that I can remove some of these leaves. And keep removing them all the way up until close to the top. Took off maybe 6 or 7 leaves there. See, this is what we have left. I'm gonna dig some more. I'm gonna suspend that in the air, and I'm gonna dig that stem all the way down into that hole. And what that's gonna do is help the plant, help this collard plant stay sturdy and stay kind of, you know, good and strong as we transplanted it. Because it's gonna take some time for those roots to reestablish, pick up water again, and support the weight and the leaves and all the new growth that's gonna be coming out of this plant. All right, and a quick note on watering. You want to water gently so that it's not kicking up too much of the soil, just as Sage has mentioned earlier. And you want to water a bit longer and a bit deeper than Sage showed you with the seeds, just because these roots are far down into the ground now. So we're not just watering on the surface anymore, we're watering deeply and slowly and gently.
All right. So another way to start plants for your garden is called division. Maybe you have a plant growing someplace else, or maybe a neighbor or a friend has a plant that you would like to grow in your garden. There are some plants that as they grow, they set off new stems, and the roots expand and they expand. And those plants you can go in and you can divide the roots, you can separate them, and then grow them in different ways. So here we are growing sorrel, which is a really great green. It has kind of a juicy, lemony flavor. It's really nice in salads. You can make sauces and things out of it. And you can see here that as it's been growing, you know, this once was just one little plant. It's looking similar to that collard that got transplanted. But as it's grown over the years, it's expanded and expanded its roots and put off new stems. So what we want to do is divide off a piece of it so we can transplant it. And you can look down in here and you can see the different sections of the plant that can be divided. So in this case, I'm going to use this shovel. Come down in here. This is actually a pretty sturdy plant. Get under that root system. And I can kind of take it from different angles. I'm getting it under on this side here. Coming over on this side. Give it a little tug. And there we are. See, it's all tangled up at the top there. And here we are. And you can look that actually this is, here's all the roots kind of connected. But up in here I actually have multiple, like here's a plant I could transplant on its own. You can even see down in here very closely are some little root pieces starting to grow. And each of these could be their own. So then I'll separate this piece off from the larger plant. I have this little piece of root coming here. And then similar to how you saw Devin transplanting, I'm gonna come into this pot. Start this one here. I'm gonna get it pretty deep because I want my plant to be tucked in nice and feel safe. I'm gonna angle it up so even though my plant has a little natural bend to it, I ultimately want it to grow right straight up. So I'm gonna put it in the pot at a little bit of an angle so that in the end my plant is straight. And then I'm gonna fill it back up. And in order to offer it, just like we did with that collard green, in order to offer it a little extra support and security, I'm gonna fill the soil a little bit higher. Just because transplanting, like any of us when we move, can be a little traumatic. So I want to be sure my plant feels nice and safe and secure. And there you go. And then I'll water this, and I could leave it in this pot to grow, or once it establishes itself with a nice root system, I could transplant it into the ground. And then each of these, if I wanted, could share these out with more folks or divide them up into other places in my garden. All right, and the last method we're going to feature today about starting plants is doing it from cuttings, and I'm going to send you back to stage to do that.
So right here we have a super healthy chaya, and we're going to propagate a piece of it. And so when we're thinking about propagating, what we want to do is we want to cut at an angle. When we cut at an angle, that gives us more surface area, and it ensures that the plant will settle in more, grow their roots, access more water. And when we're scouting out a piece that we want to cut off, we want to look for something that has a lot of potential, right? Something with a lot of new growth, and something that's younger, so then it can establish itself in the pot. So this one right here looks like a really good candidate. If you can see, there's a lot of new growth. It's on the younger side. It should adjust to being in a pot quite easily. So like I said, we're going to give it a cut on an angle. And another thing before you actually start cutting, you want to make sure you're using a clean pair of clippers or whatever you're using to cut, just so you're not passing disease through the plants. So yeah, we're just going to get in here, go at that angle, nice. And we're going to slip it right into our pot. Get it deep down in there, and I'm going to give it a good watering after this, but it looks pretty happy.
Thank you so much for watching our Garden Gateway workshop. If you're sticking around, we'll be starting our Q&A section in a few minutes, and if you're watching this after the live stream, post any questions in the comments and we'll get back to you. We will be putting out more content, so please keep checking back.
And if you're interested in what else we're up to, you should sign up for our listserv, csuinc.org, and follow us on Instagram at csuinc, or Facebook if you're on Facebook, at Community Services Unlimited.
Thanks. Happy gardening.